Let's suppose I, as a Christian, sin. Let's suppose I tell a whopper, a big lie. Now, having told this lie, do I feel guilty or do I feel bitter? Now, it's not a trick question. I feel guilty. I sinned against a holy God. And I know I may not want to confess my lie, but I know that's the only way out is to confess it, to be forgiven. Now let's suppose I don't lie. Let's suppose you lie about me and spread it all over Moscow. Now, do I feel guilty or bitter? Well, you're laughing, especially if you think you know the answer. Well, you feel bitter. And so you could draw a conclusion. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm telling a whopper in my next sentence. And here's the lie. Generally, I don't tell people to end a message, but I'll tell you in advance I'm lying. Guilt is when I sin, and bitterness is when you sin. That's not true. Guilt is when I sin, and bitterness is when I sin. Guilt is when I sin, and bitterness is when I sin. Bitterness is never caused by the other person, but we think so. And we think so. I will say there is a relationship. This other person that, quote, made you bitter, was a temptation to you, but it didn't make you bitter. You say, well, when I married this guy, I didn't think he was going to leave his socks on the floor. Was that you bitter? Well, 30 years of socks on the floor. People say, I'm not, one of the ways I can tell people are bitter, they say things like, I'm not bitter. Or they'll say, of course I'm bitter. Somehow, like it's a legit, even if they know what it is, like it's a legitimate, justified position. Let's suppose you've got a friend, a roommate, husband, wife, who, what's the word, knows what buttons to push or something like that. Knows your number and knows how to get you bitter and keep you bitter. I'll give you a couple examples. First, my own life. I've been out of the Navy a couple of years. We're moving our evangelistic work from Washington, D.C. to Annapolis, Maryland. Moved into this house, and I put off putting up on the storm windows. Finally, I realized I couldn't put it out any longer. But I didn't have storm windows. I had this plastic stuff. You know what I'm talking about? And so one day, and it was in November, I went outside to start this little project. I had a stepladder, I had the hammer, I had the tacks, and the plastic. But I had several problems with those four things. The stepladder was on uneven ground. It was wobbling. Second, the plastic was big. The third, my fingers were cold. And fourth, the tacks were tiny. And between big plastic, wobbling stepladder, tiny tacks, and cold fingers, more tacks were falling on the ground than were getting put in the plastic. Well, being a godly man, I thought I was safe from any problems with this, just taking me longer. Well, my dear wife walked around the corner of the house and wondered what in the world was taking me so long. Her mistake was she wondered out loud. And I said something unchristian to her. And she turned around and went back in the house. I stood there in the stepladder saying, she shouldn't have said it, she shouldn't have said it. She stayed in the kitchen where she belonged. This wouldn't have happened. But I already knew this truth, but I was enjoying being bitter for a while. But I realized that I couldn't be bitter forever because for all I knew, I could confess my sin. I knew I would eventually do that. But I also realized that she might be in the house saying he shouldn't have said it, he shouldn't have said it. And even though I knew how to get rid of my bitterness, I wasn't sure she could get rid of hers. I confessed my sin. It's my sin only. Went into the house. She was not in the kitchen. Went in the living room. She's sitting on the couch looking the other direction. I said, boy, I'm in the cold house now, unrelated to no storm windows. I sat down beside her and I said, Bessie, I've sinned against God, and I've confessed it, and He's forgiven me. She turned around and smiled. She said, I know you have a sensitive conscience, so I've been in here praying for you. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes I can be a temptation to her. Yeah, what's the solution? Well, I suppose don't get married. Because the nature of bitterness is not the magnitude of the other person's sin. It's the proximity of the other person to you. There can be great evils taking place in Afghanistan and Iraq and California and Bangladesh, and we can read about them, and we may be appalled, but we don't feel bitter, and we don't feel guilty. We just wondered this great evil. But something that's not a great evil, it's minor, by somebody who's close to you, makes you bitter. Here are the people you can be bitter toward. Your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your husband, your wife, your best friend, your roommate, your boss, your immediate subordinate, the people you work with. You say, no, you didn't mention everybody. Uncles. But I'll tell you, whoever it is, it's somebody that's close to you. And it's not the magnitude of the sin. If it was some great, gross evil, you'd be feeling sorry for that person instead of yourself. What keeps me confessing my bitterness as my sin, I don't think it's mine. I think it's this person that did this, said this. And as long as I think it's the other person, and I think, well, if the other person said he was sorry or she was sorry, then I'd be over my bitterness. Not true. They'll say they're sorry, and you'll still be bitter. Because it wasn't their sin. It was your sin. You get forgiven your sin by confessing your sins, not by them confessing theirs.